There has been a level of shock that the United States has not only been able to, but willing to engage in these kinds of operational matters against major enemies of ours and friends of theirs.
What do the U.S. decapitation strikes on Iran mean for Xi Jinping and the future of the Chinese regime?
They are perfectly happy to take advantage of forces in the world that are adamantly opposed to the United States and use them to their advantage and to keep the eyes off of the problems in East Asia.
Today I sit down with eminent China scholar Robert Suettinger, a former CIA and State Department intelligence analyst and author of The Conscience of the Party, Hu Yaobang, China's Communist Reformer.
And the silence from all those military commands has been deafening. There is a great deal of stress about what is it that Xi Jinping really wants us to do.
Why is Xi Jinping purging his own military leadership? And what does this reveal about the People's Liberation Army?
The system is actually more fragile than it looks. It is brittle, and when it breaks, it tends to break hard.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Robert Suettinger, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you, Jan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Congratulations on an incredible book. I have to ask you right away, we've had the U.S. engage in 2 decapitation strikes against major allies of the Chinese Communist Party, Venezuela, and most recently Iran. What is the impact of that on the Chinese Communist Party leadership?
I think it's probably a matter of considerable concern and discussion and worry that that they maybe have been wrong about Trump all along, and that there is more to his policies than they had given him credit for. I think that there has been a level of shock that the United States has not only been able to, but willing to engage in these kinds of operational matters, military on-the-ground matters, against major enemies of ours and friends of theirs, that has probably provided them with a lot of cause for concern. What they're going to do about it, I think, is very difficult to say, but it is going to be a major topic of conversation in the hallways at the National People's Congress, in the back rooms of Zhongnanhai, and certainly in the discussions that go on within China. Very great concern.
Between these two countries, it's about 25 to 30% of China's oil imports. Seems kind of like a potential sea change to their reality, and they need that energy badly.
That's true. I mean, I think they can probably make up a good deal of it from Russia, and I'm certain that the Russians are going to be happy to have the opportunity to be able to provide that oil, because it's been decreasing, I think, in terms of their own income. So that will be something that will maybe breathe new life into a relationship that seems to have been fading in the last few months as the war has continued to drag on, as Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, has met with Ukrainian officials and talked about improving relations. I think Russia has been quite unhappy, or Putin has been quite unhappy. So I think there will be some conversations that will go on. I don't know how much of a hardship the immediate drop-off in Iranian, on top of Venezuelan oil sales to China will be, but it certainly will be an unwelcome effect on an economy that is already struggling. The Chinese economy is kind of in deep trouble, and a shortage of oil is not going to help.
Well, I can't help but notice that, China hasn't been particularly supportive in really any meaningful way since these strikes to these two, ostensibly important allies. I mean, they're still delivering, I think, to Iran some of their weapons of war and things like this, but there hasn't been a sea change. There hasn't been a, really any meaningful support that I can see or change in that. How do you see that?
It's sort of a matter of, well, what do we do now? They've been expecting, I think, probably, that the United States was going to be bogged down in these different rearrangements of a strategic nature, and that therefore they could continue to make money and to keep the loose grouping of anti-American powers together and in lockstep with each other. Now it's become quite apparent that that isn't going to work anymore, that Iran cannot be expected to provide support to Hamas and Hezbollah and some of these other troublemakers in the Gulf, and that certainly the Venezuelan oil situation is going to be a change in how they go about their policies in South America and Central America. So they've got to do some rethinking. And at this point, it's hard to know who's going to be involved in that process. Wang Yi has been there forever. I don't think he's had a new idea in quite a long time. Xi Jinping is distracted by his own problems, probably, and doesn't necessarily have a key in his own ideology as to, what do we do now against an America that suddenly looks stronger and more competent. There are going to be some deep conversations, I'm sure, in Beijing about how to handle this.
One more thing about Iran. I've argued for years that part of the CCP's kind of, I would call it, utilitarian usage of Iran, okay, has been to distract America, to keep the American gaze on the Middle East and the instability there and the problems over there, as opposed to casting that gaze towards the Pacific and actually dealing with their biggest adversary. Your thoughts?
I agree with that entirely. I started working in the White House when there were great concerns about the shipment of weapons of mass destruction and various kinds of steel, miraging steel or something like that, that was going to Iran at very sensitive times. And so this has been a concern of theirs all along. They've been happy to rearm Iran, and there was concern, I think maybe a very strong concern in the United States government about what kinds of missiles are going to be provided to Iran that they could use in local conflicts. We haven't seen any of that stuff that are sort of the things of nightmares, but it's got to be a concern for everybody. So they are perfectly happy to take advantage of forces in the world that are adamantly opposed to the United States and use them to their advantage, and to keep the eyes off of the problems in East Asia that are, of course, of more immediate concern to them.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Xi Jinping's problems, and this is something that we've written and opined about a lot at the Epoch Times. Xi has recently purged the top military brass. There's only 2 out of 7 left in the leadership, and one of them is him, which is, just kind of a shocking change. Like, I think unprecedented in the history of the CCP, and you're someone who could actually opine on this. I think unprecedented in the history of the CCP change. So what are Xi Jinping's problems in your view?
Well, his immediate problem, and probably his most serious problem, is really one of how does one, from the position of chairman of the Central Military Commission, seize more careful control of the operations and movements of the People's Liberation Army. And they had a system that was in place that did that when they had 7 people on the Central Military Commission, and they covered all the bases. Now it's down to 2, and the one that is the other one, and there's neither of the people that are at the head of the Central Military Commission now, either Xi Jinping or Jiang Shengmin, who is the surviving vice chairman, are really combat commanders. So if they're going to engage in any kind of kinetic military activity, they're going to have some people in there who know more about it than those 2 guys do. So it's a handicap. I don't think it's an impediment to taking action if they see the absolute need to do so. But it's a roadblock. It's a problem, and it's part of Xi Jinping's persona that is somehow or another now incomplete. The Chinese have a term called shi, which is a sort of a military bearing, military power, military influence, all of them rolled into one word. And when you become locked in these kinds of battles as to who's in charge of whom and who gets to appoint whom, it doesn't add to your overall levels of power. So he is now needing to come back if he is to regain his former stature within the People's Liberation Army. He's going to have to come back and get them to be more obedient and more responsive to his command. And right now, there seems to be, I mean, they've given out an order after the purges of the two generals in January. They put out an order, public order, saying all military units must respond by supporting the military commission's action with respect to these two generals, and supporting the notion that Xi Jinping is the core, and that he is the head of and the chairman of the military commission, and always should be. And the silence from all those military commands has been deafening, and has been noticed by everybody. The military is just sort of sitting back and saying, well, it's, what else you got? You know, how are we doing here? There is a great deal of stress, I think, at the upper levels of the People's Liberation Army about what is it that Xi Jinping really wants us to do. Our duty is to support the party, to support the people, and to preserve our national security. And we don't know what some of these orders are going to bring about. And we want to wait and see until we're more confident that Xi Jinping is actually fully in control of himself as well as of the military chain of command, before we sort of lean forward and say, oh yeah, boss, that's a good idea, let's do that. So there's a level of distrust on both sides that is interesting.
Bob, we're going to take a quick break right now, and folks, we're going to be right back. And we're back with Bob Suettinger, author of The Conscience of the Party. You know, some people describe Xi Jinping as the paramount leader, and you're talking about some kind of crisis of confidence. That is, well, from everything I guess we even both know about the Chinese Communist Party, that is a very difficult situation for them, I think.
Well, it brings up the question of how is control exercised, and how is power exercised within that system. And that's not an easy question to answer, because we simply don't. Certainly from outside, I used to be inside the government, but even then we didn't know. When the chairman of the military commission wants an order obeyed, how does he get that done? I mean, I'm certain there's an expectation that he can just turn to one of his vice chairmen and say, do this, do that, purge them, or move this unit over there. But somehow or another, that system doesn't seem to be working very well. There are military units that seem to be operating somewhat independently, and there are commands that have been given to the military that have been disobeyed. I mean, the Jiefang Junbao, the People's Liberation Army Daily, made very clear it is the response expected of every military unit to say, yes, it was right to arrest those two generals. Hasn't happened. And that comes down to a perception on the part of some people that there's disobedience within the military high command.
And that messaging is so important to how this whole system functions. You know, this is something actually you talk about in your incredible book. Of course, your book is about Hu Yaobang, and you describe in there the nature of his purge, okay, and how the party elders in the process of purging him broke a lot of these, let's call them unwritten rules of how things work, right? And you brought some very interesting new material into the whole picture that, you know, I wasn't remotely aware of. But it reminded me of, you know, our own analysis of what Xi Jinping has done recently through his purges, breaking all sorts of unwritten rules, and in a sense, isolating himself. Like, basically, no one really knows what he's going to do next. I mean, that's the sense that's our analysis, right? Is there some sort of comparison to be made here?
Well, certainly so. I mean, the regime has always been, since the time of Mao, based upon power, personal power. It has rules and regulations, it has protocols, it has operational methodologies and so forth. But at the end of the proverbial day, it's about who has power and how he exercises it. Mao did it in some ways. Mao used ideology, he used his personal charisma, he used skullduggery and plotting, and he used Kangsheng, for example, as his Beria, as his dark force that he used to get the goods on everybody. All of those are still in play, and Xi Jinping is happy to use them.
And just please clarify, what is the dark force exactly?
The dark force is nobody's safe.
Mm-hmm.
If I dislike you and I take it into my mind that you aren't helpful to the cause, you're going to disappear. And Mao, even Mao, he was not as free with using those kinds of mechanisms as Xi Jinping seems to think he can. I mean, he arrested Zhang Youxia and Liu Zhenli using non-military party-run and government-run forces.
These are the two generals that were recently arrested, top military commission, just again, for the benefit of our viewers.
Sure,
please continue.
sure.
Yeah.
And both of them were very influential and were, as far as we could tell, fairly popular with the troops. And it had to be Xi Jinping that gave the order, probably through Cai Qi, who is his Kangsheng, in some ways, as being the guy that is in charge of the secret police. And it was the secret police in the Ministry of Public Security and in the party's general office that, according to the information that has become available through the rumor mill, shall we say, that did that arrest. It wasn't the military police. It wasn't the Central Discipline Inspection Commission, Central Military Discipline Inspection Commission, but it was people that Xi Jinping knew he could depend upon to get the job done cleanly and and get them off the stage. So they've disappeared and they've been gone for a month. No word has been heard of them. There was a rumor that indicated that a lot of people thought they'd already been killed. The regime has gone to some lengths to dispel that rumor, but it's still out there. So Xi has taken some fairly drastic steps to correct his image problem. Unfortunately for him, those steps have not seemed to work. That he is not, there's not this overwhelming support. Oh, Chairman Xi, you're the wonderful man. We're so happy that you're in charge of us. Everybody's just sort of sitting back and saying, well, what are you going to do next? But one of the things that's important to realize is that the system is actually more fragile than it looks. It is a top-dominant system. It is a Marxist-Leninist system. It is brittle, and when it breaks, it tends to break hard, and it tends to kind of I don't want to mix my metaphors here, but it tends to melt in ways that are not predictable. So, I mean, in a couple of years ago, you know, the slogan that Xi was large and in charge was meaningful and was credible. Now people are still sticking to that line without seeing that the cracks and the disagreements and the degree to which Xi Jinping is now sort of unified his opposition and is hated by almost everybody in China. I mean, you know, people who travel to China, you know, get an earful from the cab driver. They you know, if they speak Chinese, they get an earful from, you know, as long as they're outside the range of the local microphones. People know that the Chinese people are very unhappy, that their wealth opportunities are disappearing. Graduates coming out of colleges are not able to find good jobs. People who have good jobs are losing them. People who are operating on the gig economy or whatever are losing their jobs. The farmers don't have anything to do when they go back home. There's a lot of dissatisfaction. And I think the cracks in the system are beginning to be more evident. Could it collapse? I don't know. I mean, that gets you into a level of theoretical political physics that I don't you know, appreciate and don't operate at.
But you know, it's just hard to imagine a scenario where Xi Jinping remains the boss for long because, you know, things are not going his way at all.
Well, one of the things
Yeah.
that I would call on people if they read this book to focus on is the treatment of Hua Guofeng, who was the chosen successor of Mao Zedong. He took over all of the positions, not only chairman of the party and the military commission, but also premier of the state council and any other position that he wanted. And everybody looked at him and they said, well, how's he going to do? And after 4 years after Mao died, he was essentially hung up to dry. Guakung, as it's sometimes used in the Chinese. He was allowed to stay on the standing committee, but he no longer had any power. Same thing happened to Hu Yaobang. So these
They kind of shelved him.
They put him on the shelf, and Hua Guofeng refused to cooperate. Hu Yaobang, tried to be a good soldier, and to prove that there was no malice on his part, although I'm sure there was. But he simply had nothing to do. So he wandered around the countryside and did calligraphy and did poetry and stuff like that. But I mean, people say he died of a broken heart, and I don't disagree with that. His heart was a problem because he smoked several packs of cigarettes every day. But he died at 74, I think, or not quite 74.
Well, Bob Suettinger, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Thank you, Jan. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I very much enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you all for joining Bob Suettinger and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.